forth. So what I thought we'd do is just start with some introductions. Who am I? What are ebooks? What are e-readers? And then talk a tiny bit about the business of reading. What's happening now? What are people reading? So the new reading. And then orient ourselves around the book industry. What's happening with publishing right now? So first of all, thank you. I'm Ian Oeschger. I work currently at IBM. And several years ago, I worked at Netscape on Mozilla stuff, and I got a taste for open source software and hacking and so forth. And before that, I was actually a bookstore owner and was interested in publishing, and I'm still a bookworm. So I'm interested in books and how they're getting read and how they're getting made. So e-readers, what are e-readers? There's lots of, I think probably lots of you have e-readers, but we might distinguish the real e-readers in quotes, hybrid e-readers, and then this important category of other, which is growing, and we need to say something about that in a second. So first of all, real e-readers, I think everyone can acknowledge that the Kindle is sort of the paragon in this area. A real e-reader, you're reading books. It's almost certainly books and magazines from a particular vendor. You're kind of locked in with a real e-reader. In contrast, we might distinguish the hybrid e-reader. I got a, what's it called, a Nook tablet for Christmas. Maybe a thin layer of other stuff. So the same reading experience, but you can surf the web, you can check the email. And then finally, the category of other. Some data that's a couple years old suggests that people are reading ebooks mostly on their phones. So they're reading on these little devices, iPhones and so forth. Also, regular tablets are also a kind of e-reader, same reading experience, but you can do whatever you want there. And then finally, the web itself is getting optimized for reading experiences, so Instapaper readability. The salient point here is one of control, right? You have an e-reader, kind of nothing but books. You're locked into a particular vendor. In a hybrid, you may have a thin layer of other, but you've got a storefront in front of you, hard to get around, and then tablets you can sort of have at it. The thing is, reading is really happening right now. The latest Pew report says 21% of the population has read an ebook. By some measurements, it's 43 for some definition of ebook. And they're already getting favored in particular categories. So this is, reading in bed and rapid download selection. Also, when people use computers, they get real used to full text searching, and people start favoring that in their books. And then my workmate told me about this book. It's a 50 Shades of Grey. It's like a bodice-ripping pornography. It's an e-book. You can read it discreetly, so maybe discretion is another thing that's getting favored by e-readers. What's not to love about e-readers, right? They're good for authors. You can self-publish in some cases. There's a question of formats. They're good for readers. There are these new features. It's good for reading, pretty great. Also, e-readers read a lot, and they buy a lot, and they talk about what they read. So in effect, they're promoting for the publishers. People like Stephen Johnson, is a thinker I really like, even say that the reading experience is competing on your screen with other experiences, and so you're reading even more closely, which is a bit of a tortured argument. But the point is, a lot of reading going on right now, and especially the argument that there was some halcyon period in our own past when we were reading more, but the internet blew it for us is totally bogus. We're reading now more than ever. As many books as before, but a lot more other stuff as well. So reading is really lighting up for us right now. What hyper-literate halcyon period do you mean? Who's it not good for? Publishers are really having trouble. Maybe the indies, maybe there's some trouble with formats, but publishers are saying Amazon is blowing us out of the water. They're an unfair competitor. But who's the bad guy here, right? The DOJ is investigating some collusion with Apple and what they call the Big Six, these publishers. So if you ask people like Clay Shirky, who's another guy I like the thinking of, he says, well, publishing, if you're talking about that whole set of intermediaries between the creators and the consumers, they've dropped the ball, and that whole process may be going away, and he's kind of implying, well, good riddance about that, right? A notable thing is there's this guy, what's his name? Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you all know him. He seems like kind of an ass to me, but he got a 7-figure book deal from Amazon, right? Not from the publisher, but from a retailer. And that's another thing that publishers are really exclaiming about. Obviously, the precedent here is the music industry. 10 years ago, more than that, MP3s, torrents, Napster, they blew away the music industry, and a lot of people complained, but mores change as the markets change. So you have old mores, you complain about new markets, it doesn't make sense. A lot of people lose out. Another thing that happens is when you more directly connect the creator and the consumer, you find out more about tastes, you can sort your tastes, you discover tastes. In other words, classics right now are essentially free on ebooks. Nobody reads them. We know a little something about what our reading habits really are now. So the right questions are, who's profiting? Are the creators and the consumers profiting? And does it matter if the people in the middle aren't profiting? And do we have a market that's open enough to afford little guys and new guys? And are we reading? The answer is yes. And so I think with some work here, we're going to have a bright reading future. Thank you very much.